All right, so we're back and ready to dive deep into all these sources you sent about the Russian-Ukraine war. It's a lot.
Yeah, it
A
is.
lot of stuff. We've got news articles, we've got like full in-depth reports, even some first-hand accounts.
Wow.
So much going on. Well, let's just jump right in and see what we can make sense of with the latest developments, what the humanitarian situation is looking like,
Yeah,
and what the path to peace, if there is one,
right.
might look like.
Yeah, I think one of the reports you included from the UN Refugee Agency, it really kind of paints a pretty stark picture. We're now entering, year 3
I
of this
know.
conflict, and well, the human cost is just
Astronomical.
staggering. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's hard to even comprehend.
I know. I was reading that stat about the refugees, and it just kind of stopped me in my tracks. Over 6.2 million refugees have fled Ukraine.
Right.
And then on top of that, another 8 million internally displaced. I mean, think about that. That's like
It's
the
huge.
entire population of London just uprooted,
Yep.
you know? And you even sent an article about a specific refugee camp in Poland.
Oh, right.
They're overwhelmed,
Yeah,
and I think that's what it helps to put a human face on these numbers.
absolutely.
They
It's
do,
not just statistics we're talking about, it's real people.
right. Real families, individual lives.
Yeah, and it goes beyond, I think, just fleeing the fighting, too. You highlighted that article from the New York Times about the attacks on the civilian infrastructure,
Oh, right.
and that's creating a whole other level of just suffering. I mean, imagine
Uh-oh.
imagine trying to get through, like a freezing winter, but you've got no electricity, you don't have heat, there's no clean water.
I can't.
I mean, that's the reality.
It's unimaginable.
Yeah, for so many Ukrainians right now.
And on top of that, we have that whole other issue that, the long-term environmental damage, especially after, well, the Kakhovka Dam was destroyed last year.
Oh, right, yeah.
It just adds another layer of complexity.
Yeah,
We're talking about what? Contaminated water supplies, potential agricultural issues. The ripple effects are massive.
absolutely. And I think that incident, coupled with that earlier Russian strike on Chernobyl, which you flagged in the materials,
Right.
it really just highlights that this is a war with lasting environmental consequences.
For sure.
It's not just about the immediate damage, but the potential for long-term ecological devastation.
Right, for generations.
Yeah,
And then you
generally.
can't forget, like, the psychological toll.
Oh, of course, yeah.
You sent that study about the impact on children, and it was tough to read. 44% showing signs of PTSD. I mean, that's a generation
Yeah.
scarred by war.
And that's something that often gets overlooked, but it's absolutely crucial to address. We see increased cases of domestic violence, substance abuse, the list goes on and on.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah. And that trauma is going to linger long after the fighting stops.
It's a bleak picture. But then, amidst all this, there's this really surprising development. President Trump
Right.
is initiating peace talks with
Hmm.
Putin and Zelensky. I mean, it's
Bold move for sure.
It's a bold move, especially considering, those previous attempts, the ones in Belarus and Antalya in 2022, those haven't really gotten very far.
Right.
So,
It's a significant shift, no doubt. Trump's belief, and he's been very vocal about this, is that both Putin and Zelensky genuinely want peace.
right,
You know, but the question is, can he actually bridge that massive trust deficit
right,
and really get to the core issues?
right, because those are huge,
Yeah,
And speaking of challenges, you sent that piece from The Guardian with UK Defense Secretary Joan Healey, and he's expressed concerns about being sidelined in these US-led talks.
well, yeah, I mean,
They're very adamant that there can be no negotiation about Ukraine without Ukraine.
of course their concerns are understandable. Ukraine's sovereignty, their right to decide their own future, those are paramount.
Right.
And any peace agreement that doesn't recognize that is, well, it's basically a non-starter.
I mean, what's the point?
Right, exactly.
And then on top of that, there's U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's statement, the one about Ukraine's NATO membership being unrealistic as part of any potential deal.
Right,
I mean, on the one hand, that aligns with Russia's long-standing position.
right, yeah,
But on the other hand, it raises some serious concerns
for sure.
about what concessions
Exactly, what's on the table.
might be on the table, right?
Right.
What will peace ultimately cost Ukraine?
Right, and will it be a price they're willing to pay?
Right.
Especially if it involves, territorial concessions
Right.
or limitations on their, future security arrangements.
Yeah, that's a lot to consider.
It is, yeah.
Zelensky himself seems, I don't know, cautiously optimistic, maybe, at least based on that interview you included. He acknowledged Trump's efforts.
Right.
But He stresses the need for, what he called lasting security from Putin's Russia.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of distrust there,
Absolutely
you
so.
know?
And we can't forget that while these talks are going on, the fighting continues.
Right.
There's a real disconnect between the hope for diplomacy and the reality on the ground.
Speaking of the ground, you included several reports on the current military situation.
Yeah.
So, let's kind of take a look at those front lines
Yeah.
and what they tell us about Russia's strategy, especially that statistic about their recent territorial gains. I mean,
It is remarkable. In 2024 alone, they've taken over 4,000 square kilometers of Ukrainian land.
wow.
That's twice the size of Mauritius, I think.
Mauritius.
Yeah, as that Al Jazeera article pointed out.
But, it's come at a staggering cost.
Oh, the casualty figures are just
Horrifying.
horrifying. Yeah, experts estimate that Russia has lost more troops in this conflict than any war since World War II.
Really?
Yeah,
I mean, how long can they sustain
that's the big question, right?
that level? I
Yeah,
know. And even with these gains, the situation on the ground is still
it's very fluid. Yeah,
fluid, incredibly fluid. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, Russia just claimed to have captured Bodian-Dru, but then you have Ukraine saying they control parts of Russia's Kursk region.
Right.
The lines are constantly shifting.
So it's like,
You can't say who's winning.
yeah, there's no easy answer to that.
Not at all.
And it's not just about territory.
Of course not.
Right. This war has really triggered this global food security crisis.
Yeah,
And you sent that World Food Program report, and it just lays it out so clearly.
it's alarming, yeah.
It is. Russia's withdrawal from the Black Sea Grain Initiative has had these, shockwaves
Oh, huge.
through global food markets, right? Prices are up. Millions are facing famine.
It's a crisis.
It's a reminder of how interconnected our world really is.
It really is. And it's a critical point to remember that this war's impact reaches far beyond the battlefields.
Absolutely.
It's affecting everything from energy prices to global supply chains. I mean, we're seeing a reshaping of the geopolitical landscape happening in real time.
I know. And, that's where the expert analysis gets really fascinating.
Oh, yeah,
You've gathered all these opinions, and
Yeah.
it's just this spectrum
it is.
of viewpoints about the potential for peace and the future of Ukraine.
It's really interesting.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
We see, people advocating for a negotiated settlement, prioritizing, ending the bloodshed,
Right.
even if it means concessions.
Right.
But then there are others who really emphasize holding Russia accountable.
Right.
They're arguing that, appeasement just emboldens further aggression.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
And you included that quote from EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas.
Oh, yeah.
And she's warning about the historical failures of appeasement. It raises that question of what price are we willing to pay for peace?
Yeah.
And what precedent does it set for future conflicts?
It's a crucial question, absolutely. And it kind of ties into this idea that this war is like a laboratory for modern warfare.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, which a lot of the articles you sent explore. We see these new technologies, from drones to hypersonic missiles, being tested in real time.
Yeah.
And it raises these really profound questions about the future of conflict.
Absolutely. You even included that CSIS report
Right.
about the analytic failure
Oh, yeah.
to predict Russia's military capabilities and Ukraine's resilience. It feels like we're still trying to figure out the dynamics of modern warfare,
I think so. Yeah.
and the potential for miscalculation.
Oh, it's huge.
Seems huge.
Yeah, this conflict has really shattered so many of those assumptions about conventional military thinking.
I agree.
Yeah. We have to reevaluate how we understand power dynamics,
Right.
the role of technology, and the impact of, things like information warfare.
Yeah, the information war is a whole other
Oh, absolutely.
beast.
Yeah.
It's a lot to process, but it feels like we're really just scratching the surface here.
I agree.
What are, the key takeaways for you so far?
It's the sheer human cost of this war that really hits me the hardest. Those stories you shared about the refugees, the families being torn apart, individuals just trying to survive, it really underscores the real-world consequences of these geopolitical decisions. It reminds us that these aren't abstract ideas. These are events that are shattering lives.
Every day.
Every single day. It's really hard to grasp sometimes.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the big picture and forget about the individuals.
Yeah.
You included that article, the one about the Ukrainian resistance fighters, those everyday citizens just taking up arms to defend their country. It's powerful stuff.
It is, and, I think it really speaks to that concept of national resilience,
Oh, interesting.
which we often kind of overlook in our analyses. Ukraine's resistance, it's not just about military tactics.
No.
It's about this collective will of a people just determined to defend, well, everything.
Right, their home.
Their homes, their families, their identity, their whole way of life.
Right.
And that factor, I think that human element, might be something that Putin underestimated.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it kind of adds another layer to that whole debate about military aid, doesn't
Yeah,
it?
absolutely.
You sent that piece from The Economist, and they're arguing that continued Western support is essential for Ukraine's survival.
Right.
But then there are also those voices, like that op-ed from Renation, cautioning against escalating the conflict and risking a wider war.
Right.
So it's this
It's a
really,
tightrope walk.
it's a tough balance, yeah.
I think that's the key dilemma policymakers are facing right now. There's that moral imperative to support a democracy under attack.
Right,
You want to prevent a larger Russian victory, which could destabilize the whole region.
right,
But then there's the very real fear of sparking a wider conflict.
right. Maybe even nuclear?
Exactly. That's the nightmare scenario.
Right.
So it's, yeah, a high-stakes calculation with no easy answers.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the humanitarian side, the geopolitical stuff, but you also sent over some pretty in-depth analysis of the military situation itself.
Oh, yeah.
That Atlantic Council report on Russia's evolving tactics, that was a really fascinating read.
Oh, definitely.
What are some of the key military lessons that you think we're learning from this conflict?
I think one of the most striking takeaways is the effectiveness of asymmetric warfare.
Oh, interesting.
Ukraine's facing this much larger, better equipped adversary,
Right.
but they've been incredibly adept at leveraging their strengths.
Like what? What kind of strengths?
Well, their agility, their local knowledge, and they have this highly motivated fighting force.
Oh, right. They're fighting for their homes.
Exactly.
So they're able to counter Russia's advantages in, well, firepower, manpower, all of that.
Exactly. They've really, rewritten the playbook on how a smaller nation can effectively resist a major power.
It's like a David and Goliath story, but in this case, David's got some pretty sophisticated weaponry.
Thanks to Western support, yeah.
Yeah. But it seems like technology alone isn't enough,
Oh, no, not at all.
right? There's that human element, too.
Right.
The will to fight,
Yeah,
the ability to adapt, the strategic brilliance of, well, their leadership, frankly.
absolutely. And that brings us back to that CSIS report you highlighted before
Right.
about the analytic failure. It seems like our traditional ways of, assessing military power,
Yeah.
they might not be enough anymore
Yeah, they're outdated.
to really grasp the complexity of modern warfare,
Right. Yeah.
especially when you have factors like national identity, societal cohesion,
Right. Those are huge.
playing such a decisive role.
Yeah, those are big. So how do we adjust our thinking then? What does this mean for future conflicts? I mean, what does all of this tell us about, let's say, Taiwan or other potential flashpoints?
That's a great question, and it's one that's being fiercely debated right now
I bet.
in defense circles. One clear takeaway, though, is the importance of investing in resilience.
Oh, interesting.
Not just, tanks and missiles, but that societal cohesion,
Oh, right.
strong institutions,
Right.
a robust civil defense infrastructure.
So it's about a nation's capacity to endure, to resist,
Yeah, to bounce back.
yeah, to bounce back from adversity. And that's where the role of the international community becomes really crucial, right?
Oh, absolutely.
You sent that paper from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and they're advocating for a more proactive approach
Right.
to supporting democratic resilience globally.
Yeah, it's not enough to just react.
Right.
The West, and really the whole international community, we need a more strategic approach to strengthening democratic institutions.
So, like, proactively supporting them.
Exactly. Fostering economic development, supporting civil society in those vulnerable countries.
So it's about building partnerships.
Yeah.
Investing in the long term.
Long-term stability, absolutely. And recognizing that, a threat to democracy anywhere.
Is a threat to democracy everywhere.
Precisely.
And that paper also brought up concerns about China's potential role in this conflict.
Yeah.
You included that Rand Corporation report suggesting that China might be taking notes.
Oh, for sure.
Learning from Russia's mistakes in Ukraine, maybe applying those lessons to their own calculations about Taiwan.
That's a very real concern. China's watching all of this very closely.
I bet.
Analyzing Russia's military performance, how the West is responding.
Right,
They're looking for weaknesses, assessing different tactics.
right.
And I think gauging the international community's resolve.
Yeah, how far will we go?
Exactly. And all of that knowledge could definitely shape their decision-making in the future.
Yeah, that's unsettling. It feels like, I don't know, we're entering this new era of geopolitical competition.
I think so, yeah.
The lines between peace and war are blurring,
Yeah.
and the stakes are just incredibly high. What do you see as the most pressing challenges for, the international community trying to navigate this really complex landscape?
One of the biggest, I think, is just the erosion of trust
Oh, yeah.
and this fragmentation of the international order.
Right, everyone for themselves.
Yeah, that rules-based system that has basically underpinned global stability for decades. It's under immense strain.
I mean, we see it every day.
Yeah, we see this rise in nationalism, protectionism, great power rivalry,
Right,
and it makes it really difficult to find common ground,
right,
to build consensus, to work together on those shared challenges.
right, like climate change.
Exactly. Climate change, pandemics, the threat of nuclear proliferation.
You included that article by Yuval Noah Harari.
Oh,
He's
right.
arguing that the biggest threat to humanity in the 21st century isn't actually nuclear war,
Right.
but our inability to cooperate.
To solve these existential problems.
Yeah, and it seems like the Russia-Ukraine war is both a symptom and a catalyst
Oh, absolutely.
for this breakdown in international cooperation.
Yeah, it's this vicious cycle.
Right,
So we desperately need a renewed commitment to multilateralism.
right, working together.
Exactly. To diplomacy, to finding ways to, bridge those divides, rebuild trust.
Right. Because if we can't even talk to each other,
Right.
then what hope is there?
Exactly. We can't afford to retreat into these ideological camps.
Right, us versus them.
Yeah. We have to prioritize the common good.
So how do we move forward then? How do we find that common ground in a world that feels, honestly, increasingly polarized, increasingly fractured?
It's a daunting task, but I think it starts with recognizing our shared humanity.
Yeah, that we're all in this together.
Exactly. Understanding that we're all facing these common challenges, challenges that transcend national borders.
Right.
We need to, rediscover the power of empathy.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Listening to each other's perspectives.
Yeah, finding ways to compromise, to cooperate.
Right,
And we really need to invest in those institutions and mechanisms that help us do that.
right. Facilitate that dialogue.
Yeah, that build bridges, that promote understanding across cultures and ideologies.
It's a tall order, especially, with a conflict as brutal and as divisive as this one.
It is.
But I think it's important to remember that even in the darkest of times, there's still hope.
Oh, absolutely.
Humanity has this remarkable capacity for resilience, for innovation.
For finding a way.
Yeah, for finding a way to overcome these seemingly insurmountable challenges.
You're absolutely right. And it reminds me of, those stories of individual resilience that you shared.
Right, the refugees.
The refugees rebuilding their lives.
Right, starting over.
Yeah, the volunteers risking their safety to help others.
Those are incredible stories.
Yeah, the soldiers fighting for their country's freedom.
Right.
Those stories, they remind us that even in the face of just unimaginable hardship, the human spirit endures.
It's inspiring, for sure.
It is, yeah. It gives me hope.
As we kind of dig deeper into the specifics of this conflict, I'm really curious about your thoughts on the impact of the war on the global energy market. What really stands out to you from the materials you sent?
I think one of the most significant developments has been how quickly Europe has transitioned away from Russian energy.
Wow, yeah.
You included that report from the International Energy Agency.
Oh, right.
And it really detailed how the war has basically forced investment in renewable energy sources and diversifying those energy supplies.
Yeah, that report was fascinating. It really highlighted how vulnerable you are if you rely on just one supplier for such a critical resource.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It seems like, I don't know, the conflict is reshaping that whole global energy landscape.
Absolutely, and in ways that could have really lasting consequences.
Yeah. And that has huge geopolitical ramifications too, right?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, Europe is trying to reduce its reliance on Russian gas.
Right.
So they're cooperating more closely with the U.S.
Yeah, and other energy producers.
So that further strengthens those transatlantic alliances.
Exactly. But at the same time, Russia has had to find new markets
Right.
for their energy exports.
Right. They've got to sell it somewhere.
Exactly. So they're pivoting towards Asia, China, India.
So it's like this whole shift in energy flows.
Yeah.
It's redrawing the geopolitical map.
Absolutely.
Wow. And I imagine that raises some big questions about the future of Russia's economy too, right?
Oh, for sure.
You sent that analysis from the Financial Times, and they're predicting the long-term impact of Western sanctions plus the loss of their European energy market.
Right.
That could really weaken Russia's economic prospects.
Yeah, I mean, the war has come at a huge cost.
And the sanctions have really restricted their access to capital markets, haven't they?
Oh, yeah, they've disrupted their supply chains. And there's been a brain drain, too.
What do you mean by that?
Well, skilled professionals are leaving the country.
Oh, right,
So while Russia has managed to kind of soften the blow in the short term,
right,
through fiscal measures, diversifying their trade,
right.
the long-term outlook is still pretty uncertain.
Yeah, that makes sense. It feels like the economic fallout from this war, I mean, it's going to be felt for years.
Oh,
In
absolutely.
Russia and globally.
Globally, yeah.
You even sent that study from the World Bank, and it was examining the impact of the war on global food prices and supply chains. And it was just like, Wow!
It's a domino effect.
It is. The war has disrupted agricultural production,
Yeah.
leading to shortages, price hikes on those essential commodities like wheat, corn, fertilizer,
It's a crisis.
and that's exacerbating food insecurity in vulnerable regions, particularly in Africa and the Middle East.
It's a humanitarian disaster.
It is.
And, it just shows how interconnected we all are.
A conflict in one part of the world can have these ripple effects
Yeah,
that impact people thousands of miles away.
exactly. And this is why we need greater international cooperation.
Right, to work together.
Yeah, to address this economic fallout, to provide humanitarian assistance,
Right.
and to build more resilient global supply chains.
Right, ones that can handle these kinds of shocks.
Exactly.
You also included some really interesting stuff about the role of technology in this conflict.
Oh, yeah.
That article from Wired about the use of AI and drones on the battlefield,
Oh, yeah.
that was eye-opening.
It's a whole new world.
It is, drones are everywhere now, right?
Oh, yeah, they provide real-time intelligence,
Right.
targeting capabilities.
Wow.
They can even launch attacks.
And AI is just changing so rapidly.
Oh, it's unbelievable.
With potential applications in, well, everything, from logistics to autonomous weapon systems.
It's mind-boggling.
It's like science fiction is becoming reality.
Yeah, it kind of is.
Right on the battlefield. But, that raises some serious ethical questions, too, doesn't it?
Oh, huge ethical questions.
You sent that opinion piece from the New York Times, and they were debating the whole issue of autonomous weapon systems.
Oh, right.
And the potential for things to go wrong.
The unintended consequences.
Which could be devastating.
Oh, yeah, catastrophic.
So as technology advances, we have to establish these clear ethical guidelines.
Yeah, international norms.
Right, to govern how it's used in warfare.
Absolutely. We can't let the machines take over.
Right, we need to make sure that human judgment is still there.
Right, human accountability.
Yeah.
Even as we embrace, the potential of these new technologies.
Right, it's a complex landscape, and it's changing so fast.
Yeah, it's dizzying.
So as we navigate this new era of warfare, what do you think are the most important lessons for policymakers and military leaders?
I think adaptability is key.
Oh, interesting.
The Ukrainians have shown us that.
Right.
They've been so agile in responding to Russia's tactics, integrating those new technologies,
Right.
adjusting their strategies quickly.
Right, on the fly.
Yeah, that ability to learn, to adapt, to innovate.
That's essential, isn't it?
Oh, it's crucial.
But it's not just about the tech, right?
No, not at all.
You sent over that report from the Royal United Services Institute, and they really emphasize the importance of the human factor
Oh,
in
absolutely.
modern warfare.
Technology is a tool.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it's humans that decide how wars are fought and won.
Yeah, it's people making those decisions.
Yeah, the motivation of the troops, their training, the leadership,
The resilience of the population.
the support of the international community.
All of that.
Those factors are just as important as any fancy gadget or weapon.
Yeah, if not more so.
So it's really about combining that technological edge with human ingenuity.
Adapting to the new reality,
Right.
but still holding on to those core values.
Yeah, the principles that guide us.
So as we delve deeper into the complexities of this conflict, I'm really interested in those different perspectives you've gathered on the possibility of peace.
Oh, yeah.
What are the main arguments for and against, negotiated settlement at this point in the war?
Well, those who are pushing for a negotiated settlement, they argue it's the only way to stop the bloodshed,
Right.
to prevent further suffering.
That's a strong argument.
Yeah, and they point to the enormous human and economic costs of the war.
Right. Those are undeniable.
The risks of escalation.
Nobody wants that.
No. And, the potential for this protracted stalemate that helps no one.
So they believe that a negotiated compromise, even if it's not perfect,
Right.
is better than continued fighting.
Yeah, choose the lesser of two evils, so to speak.
But there's also a lot of pushback against that idea, right?
Oh, yeah, a lot of pushback.
You included that op-ed from the Washington Post.
Oh, right.
And they're arguing that any peace deal that rewards Russia's aggression would set a dangerous precedent.
Oh, yeah, that's a huge concern.
Right. It would basically be saying, hey, it's okay to invade your neighbor.
Exactly. And it could embolden other authoritarian regimes
Oh, absolutely.
to do the same thing.
So those who are against a negotiated settlement, they're basically saying that it would be appeasement.
Appeasement, rewarding Putin for breaking international law.
Right. And potentially encouraging him to be even more aggressive in the future.
Yeah, emboldening him, giving him a green light.
So they believe that Russia has to be held accountable
Oh, yeah.
for what they've done. And any peace deal has to guarantee Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity.
Right. No compromise on those fundamental principles.
So it's this balancing act,
Yeah, it's a tough one.
weighing the desire for peace against the need for justice.
The urgency of ending the suffering against the long-term consequences of, rewarding that kind of aggression.
That's a tough call. So how do we navigate that? I mean, it's this moral and strategic minefield.
It is. It really is. There are no easy answers here,
Right.
and any solution is going to involve some really difficult compromises.
But it's important to keep those core principles in mind, right?
Oh,
The
absolutely.
right of a nation to choose its own destiny,
Self-determination, yeah.
upholding international law,
That's
and
crucial.
deterring future aggression.
We can't let this become the norm.
Right. You also included some really interesting material about the historical parallels to this conflict.
Oh, yeah.
That article from Foreign Affairs comparing the current situation to the Cold War, I thought that was especially insightful,
Oh, yeah. History could be a great teacher.
even if the comparisons aren't perfect. Sure.
Exactly. The Cold War, for example, was this period of intense rivalry.
Right. Ideological, geopolitical.
Yeah, but it was also a time when diplomacy and deterrence really worked.
They prevented a nuclear war, right?
Exactly. They kept those superpowers from going to war with each other.
So even though this situation is unique, there are still lessons we can learn,
Oh, tons of lessons.
both about the dangers of things spiraling out of control
Yeah, escalation.
and the potential for diplomacy.
To avert disaster.
As we kind of wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'm just really struck by the complexity of this conflict.
It's a lot to unpack, yeah.
There are so many factors at play, so many different viewpoints.
And the stakes are, well, they couldn't be higher.
What's your biggest takeaway so far?
It's really hit home for me that this war isn't just about Ukraine.
No, it's so much bigger than that.
Yeah, it's a pivotal moment in history.
Right, a turning point.
Yeah, a clash of ideologies.
And the outcome of this, I mean, it's going to shape the world order for years to come.
It will, there's no doubt about that.
So it has huge implications for democracy,
Yeah.
for international law, for the future of global security.
It's a watershed moment.
It is. It's a sobering thought.
It is, yeah.
But it also reminds us how important it is to be informed.
To engage.
We can't just sit back and watch this happen.
We need to understand what's going on, participate in those critical conversations.
Right. Make our voices heard.
And work towards solutions that, uphold our shared values and interests.
Right. Because if we don't, who will?
Exactly. This is a time for clear thinking, for courageous leadership.
Right. For action.
Yeah. And a renewed commitment to those principles of peace, justice, human dignity.
Yeah, those are worth fighting for.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it does feel like we're at this crossroads.
Yeah, turning point.
Not just for Ukraine, but for, I don't know, the whole global order, right? And you sent that article from The Atlantic about, the return of great power competition.
Oh, right.
And it's easy to feel overwhelmed,
Oh, for sure.
even helpless in a way,
Yeah.
what can we do as individuals,
It's a good question.
in the face of these massive geopolitical shifts?
I think about that a lot, too.
Yeah,
It's easy to get paralyzed by the scale of these problems, but I think we have to remember that even small actions can make a difference.
right.
Staying informed, talking about these issues with people, supporting organizations working on the ground.
Right. You even included that Amnesty International guy.
Oh, yeah.
The one with ways to help Ukrainian refugees.
Yeah. It's a good reminder that amidst all the political stuff,
Right.
there are real people hurting, and they need our help.
And beyond the immediate crisis, I mean, we can advocate for policies, right?
Absolutely.
Ones that promote peace, diplomacy, human rights.
Those are crucial.
Right. We can support leaders who prioritize those values
Yeah.
and hold accountable the ones who don't.
It all comes back to, being an active citizen.
Right. Being engaged.
Yeah.
We can't just passively consume the news.
No, we have to participate.
Make our voices heard, right?
Exactly. And that means, I think, being critical of the information we're consuming.
Oh, that's a good point.
You sent that report from the Institute for Strategic Dialogue
Oh, right.
about all the disinformation and propaganda.
Right. Surrounding this conflict.
It's everywhere,
Yeah.
So we have to be really careful about our sources, check those facts,
Right.
be wary of those narratives that oversimplify a very complex reality.
It's like a minefield out there.
It is, yeah.
Trying to figure out
What's true?
what's true,
What's real, what's not.
Yeah. It's exhausting.
It is, but it's so important.
Right. If we want to make informed decisions.
Yeah, if we want to be part of the solution.
I think that's a big takeaway from all of this. The Russia-Ukraine war it's a wake-up call, isn't it?
It is a big one.
It reminds us that peace is fragile,
Oh, so fragile.
that democracy needs defending.
We can't take our freedoms for granted.
No, absolutely not. Well, you've given us so much to think about. As we wrap up this deep dive, is there, I don't know, a final thought, a question maybe you'd like to leave our listener with as they continue to process all of this?
I think the most important question we can ask ourselves is, what kind of world do we want to live in?
That's a big one.
It is. Do we want a world where it's all about brute force?
Right. My make's right.
Yeah. Or do we want a world based on cooperation, on diplomacy, on respect for international law?
Those are two very different visions.
They are. And the choices we make today, I mean, every single one of us,
Right.
those choices will determine which path we go down.
That's a powerful challenge. And to our listeners out there, I hope this deep dive has given you the knowledge, the insights you need to engage in those crucial conversations,
Yes, get
to
involved.
make informed choices, and to, well, contribute to building a more peaceful and just world.
That's what it's all about.
It is. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged. FFT, FC,